That's pretty much my...
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, good. Have you skied in Colorado?
Yes.
Welcome to this event. My name is Russ Moore. I'm the provost of the University of Colorado Boulder campus. Welcome to this panel discussion on energy and environmental policy. It's exciting for us to be hosting this panel at the University of Colorado at Boulder because we're so deeply ingrained in the sustainability, energy advances, and environmental policy in both research and in teaching. It's my pleasure to welcome to campus today Nancy Sutley, the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. As many of you know, she serves as the principal environmental policy advisor to President Obama, and we're very pleased to have her here on campus. Congressman Jared Polis is our moderator today, and a man who needs no introduction. As you know, he's a longtime Coloradan and a highly successful business entrepreneur. We're fortunate to have him as a friend of the university. Congressman Polis is an advocate of higher education and well articulates the value and the importance of the comprehensive research university. He, as well as anyone, knows the value of basic research to the economy and to the future of this country. Please help me welcome Congressman Jared Polis.
I want to thank the University of Colorado for hosting this. Thanks to Patty Limerick and Phil Weiser, and of course to Nancy Sutley for coming out here, and we look forward to hearing the administration's vision for clean energy future. As we all know, Boulder, along with CU and the federal labs and our vibrant private sector, entrepreneurial community, and the renewable energy sector have become a center for the new energy economy. We in Colorado are really fast becoming the Silicon Valley of clean tech. And last summer we conducted a full-day workshop on sustainability. Some of you might have been here. Both of our senators came here to Wolf to talk about renewable energy, and we heard testimony from some promising entrepreneurs and business people in the area who gave testimony about renewable energy sector in Colorado. And we and our political leadership, up and down from the state level to the federal level, truly understand that clean energy and clean tech are not just environmental imperatives, but economic imperatives for both our region as well as our country. We're looking forward to hearing from the audience today and also from Chair Sutley, and clean energy is really leading the way for our economic recovery and for global sustainability. Nancy Sutley is the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, usually called CEQ. In her role as chair, she serves as the principal economic policy advisor to the president. So we wonder, when you say who is the president listening to, that's who we have here today. Prior to her appointment, Chair Sutley was the deputy mayor for energy and environment for the city of Los Angeles, California. She represented LA on the board of directors for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and served on the California State Water Resources Control Board. She also mentioned she has worked with Ken Salazar for many years as well, a Coloradan and somebody who knows water inside and out as well. She also worked for California Governor Gray Davis as an energy advisor, managing state and federal regulations. She served as a deputy secretary for policy and intergovernmental relations in the California Environmental Protections Agency for 4 years. And during the administration of President Clinton, she worked for the EPA as a senior policy advisor in San Francisco and special assistant to the administrator in Washington, D.C. It is very exciting to welcome to the CU campus somebody of the stature, integrity, and experience of Nancy Sutley, and it's my honor to welcome her to Colorado's 2nd Congressional District and the University of Colorado. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Congressman Polis, and really it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the University of Colorado and all of you for coming out. It's been a while since I've been to Boulder, but the last time I was here it was snowing, so I don't know, maybe I could be your snow angel or something. But it's really great to be here, and always exciting to come to Colorado, because I think, as you said, Congressman, it is sort of ground zero for the clean energy economy. And I say that somewhat begrudgingly as a Californian. We never like to cede the leadership to anybody else, but clearly the kind of commitment from the public and private sector here in Colorado towards clean energy is something that is not only great for Colorado, but great for our country. And part of the reason I'm glad to have this opportunity is, as you know, the President gave his State of the Union address earlier this week, and it's always an important time for all of us in the administration to go out outside of Washington and to actually talk to Americans about their views. And the President laid out a vision not only for the State of the Union this year, but really a vision of an American economy, as he said, built to last. And if you saw the speech or heard the speech, he was very clear that one of the pillars of an American economy that's built to last is clean energy. Now, there's no question that for both our economic prosperity and for the quality of life in our communities and for the survival of our planet, our efforts towards creating a cleaner and more sustainable energy economy are just critical to today and to our future. And so he devoted a great deal of the speech to energy and to understanding the link, again, between energy and economic prosperity and energy and our quality of life. And so he talked about a number of things. I mean, clearly, we are in a transition between, I guess, the old energy economy, which will continue to remain important for many years to come, and the new energy economy, and how we manage that transition, how we manage that not only for our own needs, but in the global race for clean energy, will make a great deal of difference to the United States for many years to come. And so he talked about a number of things and laid out a number of things. First of all, he noted that, and I know this has been a big issue here in Colorado, that we now have techniques and technology that are making it able for us to access reserves of natural gas. By estimates, 100-year supply of natural gas. Some have said the United States could be the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. There are tremendous benefits to these resources, both in terms of their ability to bring down the costs of energy, but also that relative to other fossil fuels, natural gas is cleaner from both the conventional pollution and greenhouse gas pollution perspective, but that the techniques themselves bear a lot of watching and a lot of making sure that we can do that safely. And that's an effort that the federal government has to be engaged in with states and with communities and with the industries involved. He also talked about other conventional energy development, and I think the important point about oil and gas is we consume a lot of the oil and gas in the world. We have about 2% of the world's oil reserves. We're going to continue to produce oil here domestically, but again, we have to make sure we're doing it smart. But really, the emphasis, I think, in the speech was really on how do we move to this clean energy economy, and this is something that the President has been talking about now since he started running for office, and with the support of great members of Congress like Congressman Polis, and we've been able to push some things forward. He noted, I think, with some, he noted the disappointment that we weren't able to get comprehensive energy and climate legislation through the Congress a couple of years ago. The House acted, but it never made it out of the Senate. But in the meantime, we need to still work on those things that will help push forward this clean energy economy. And clearly, the role of communities, of states like Colorado, and the public and the private sector to push these things forward is very important. And the federal government can do its part also. The President was here in Colorado yesterday at an Air Force base where they're looking at that they're using renewable energy, and that this is a big push across the Department of Defense and the defense facilities to to develop more renewable energy. And he mentioned that the Navy was going to was entering into the largest purchase of renewable energy ever, of 1 gigawatt of renewable energy. Also talked about the development of renewable energy facilities on public lands, making our public lands available, as they are for many other activities, available, working with the developers, working with the states to ensure that we can develop the renewable resources that the United States has so many of. But this, I think, is also building on the things that we've been doing over the last 3 years. Phil and I, when Phil was in the White House, we worked together on a report laying out what the federal government could do to help grow the smart grid. And I know it's been a big issue here in Boulder. But really, there are a lot of things that the federal government can do, whether it's through research and development and things like challenges to get people to think about what the applications are for the smart grid, but that clearly we have to transition from an electricity system that Thomas Edison and Tesla would recognize 100 and however many years later to one that meets our modern needs, that provides people with information about how they use energy in their homes and their businesses, that can support the integration of renewable energy and support things like electric vehicles and things that I don't think Edison maybe could have contemplated. And that's an important thing that we need to continue to work on. But on the environmental front, I think I would just say a couple of things. One is we have really, under the President's leadership, pushed forward with some of the most important environmental advances in decades. Number one among those is new fuel economy standards that will double fuel economy for the U.S. car fleet by the year 2025. Double it. And if you think about, whether your primary concern is the environment or our economy or our national security, reducing our dependence on foreign oil by reducing our demand for oil for transportation fuels is will be a huge achievement and a lasting legacy for everybody who's worked on this. We've also pushed through on a number of very important air pollution rules that had been stymied for decades. EPA in 2011 put out two very important ones, one called the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule, and the second to reduce mercury and air toxics from coal-fired power plants. And as I said, decades overdue. These will, we still rely on coal for about almost half of our energy, and many of the coal-fired power plants in the U.S. are more than 50 years old and have not put on pollution controls. So for public health and for our environment, these plants will now have to put on widely available, cost-effective control technologies that finally will get the needed pollution controls on these power plants. So I'll stop there because I think we want to engage in discussion here and hear from all of you. But I guess I would just sort of leave with one thought. For many years, the environment was a bipartisan issue. The legislation that created the Council on Environmental Quality in 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act, was passed the Congress almost unanimously and was signed by President Nixon. President Nixon signed the executive orders that created EPA and NOAA. Some of the landmark environmental legislation, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, were passed during the Nixon administration and signed by President Nixon. And yet we find ourselves now in a much more polarized atmosphere. And yet, as I travel around the country and hear from people, hear the kinds of things that are happening in places like Colorado with this growth in clean energy, this real desire to see to see this move forward, and that for this to be an important part of how we restore economic growth to our country. It's always it's good to remind people in Washington that Americans care about the environment, they care about their environment, and they want all of us working on their behalf to do more. So I thank you for your interest in.
Sure, and before we go to the audience, we want to give our two other distinguished panelists the chance to react and say a few words. First, again, we'd like to thank the Dean for the use of the facilities, and we'll give Phil Weiser a chance to respond, and then we'll go to Dr. Limerick.
So a couple things. First off, Nancy, thank you for coming out here. It's really fabulous. The President administration is very well served by Nancy's leadership. Having seen that up close, I can tell you it makes an enormous difference. And it's a very demanding job, and we appreciate you doing it. We couldn't be luckier with a congressman than Jared Polis. I think people here have appreciation for that. His leadership, having been an entrepreneur, makes him extraordinarily unique, and we need more people like you. So thank you, Jared, for making sacrifices. And a partner of mine here, Patty Limerick, is a crown jewel on this campus. Really. People who don't know how special she is should pick up her books and listen to her more, because she has a wealth of perspective on the West. I also want to thank our Provost Russ Moore for kicking us off here and for really setting a tone about how much this campus cares about this issue. We have a cross-campus initiative going on he's been very supportive in that we're involved in here in the law school. The law school's piece of this on energy innovation, I have to acknowledge my partner William Boyd, who's here. He's doing unbelievable work talking about climate change efforts and energy innovation. People who care about that need to get to know William. So I want to say a few things, and then, like Jared said, get to the audience. First off, there's a very delicate discussion right now about what the role of government is in general, and in particular in this space, in energy. And part of the challenge is many people don't see or feel the role of the government, so it doesn't feel real to them. And that's a big challenge. The railroads got built in this country not because merely free enterprise made it happen, but you had a governmental framework on a number of different dimensions that ultimately were essential to us having a state-of-the-art rail system that enabled us to compete. Having the core infrastructure and fundamentals of the economy throughout our nation's history have not been because the government did nothing. In many cases, you see a story of the government being involved. The telegraph, the first telegraph line, the demonstration project, was paid for by the federal government. In energy, it's no different. So we heard about this fracking revolution, as it's often called, and what the president said, and again, people often jump over this, that technology didn't emerge from nowhere. There was federal funding that enabled it to develop, and what a game changer it has been is still something that people underappreciate. Literally years ago, 2, 3, 4, 5, there were discussions about us importing natural gas. To have, within 5 years, us having enough for 100 years, I mean, that's an astonishing change because of federally supported R&D that paid a huge dividend. You could go on with other examples, the internet being one of the more famous ones. That's a core role for government, and it's one that we have to continue to appreciate. Second, regulation sometimes gets a dirty word until, of course, you want it, and then you're saying, who's protecting the public health? So better than having lots of communities say, I don't trust fracking, I want to have a ban on any fracking, this technology that's giving us all this natural gas, there's an important discussion about what rules are necessary to protect public health. And the industry, in many cases, is willing to say responsibly, how do we figure this out? Because they have a long-term interest in a sustainable and sustainable development regulatory regime. That is an enterprise that federal leadership can play a role helping in. The states are, in many cases, already at the fore, Colorado being one of them. Another point I'd really want to emphasize, too, Nancy mentioned this, is the electric grid. It is an outdated infrastructure, given what demands are placed upon it. Electric vehicles are a great example. Distributed generation is another. And also, given what we know from the IT revolution, we can do. People can use energy smarter. So one thing that was rolled out this week, we heard from Nancy about challenges, the Green Button Initiative, saying to energy companies, make available energy usage information in a very quick turnaround time so consumers can start getting more visibility. Here in Colorado, 2 companies deserve a shout out, one of which got one from the Vice President, was here last spring. Tendril, which is a leader in this technology, and Simple Energy, a company that was part of the Techstars effort that Jared kicked off with Brad Feld and David Cohen. This is going to be a game changer too. People can use energy much smarter, and as a result, will have to generate less of it and pay less for it, because we're often generating lots of energy for those peaks, and if we can shave them, that's a huge reduced burden on the whole system. So there's a lot going on in this space. It's very exciting, and public policy is going to continue to play a key role, and we're lucky to have such thoughtful leadership at the helm.
Excellent. Dr. Limerick.
I second all of the expressions of gratitude, and I am an armchair quarterback in public policy, which is a delightful place to sit, but it certainly gives me reason to appreciate and admire the people who are on the field, and Congressman Polis and Nancy Sutley, thank you for doing that, and I'm staying in the stands, I think, but my position in the stands really gives me an occasion to appreciate what you've taken on in public service. And the Dean, for heaven's sake, the Dean, what a pleasure. This is the most gifted organizer of panel discussions and getting people to think together in private and in public settings. I have never seen anything like it. I follow him like a small duckling. Well, anyway, okay. That you may not want that. You may not be liking having a duckling walking on behind you, but a happy duckling there. So I had 5 points I wanted to make, so I will make them quickly. The bipartisanship of the environmental origins, oh my goodness, is that ever historically verifiable? I believe that we have, for a few more years, an extraordinary person in Washington who I think is incredibly underutilized for good purposes, and that is John Whitaker, who was Nixon's environmental policy advisor. He's in his 80s. He loves to have dinner at the Cosmopolitan Club. He's charming, he's gracious, and he should be visible. I know him because we did our series on the Secretaries of the Interior, and Rogers Morton had passed away, so we brought his deputy, but he is astounding, and for somebody to embody the point that you were making, I think he should be out in the public, and he's really going to be appreciative of, I bet. Well, anyway, he has a whole other life that may not need this, but I just think he's an extraordinary person to have there, and he does symbolize that point. Second, I thought the President's State of the Union remarks on natural gas were just something I had, I've heard others say it, but from that place and that balance of the two positions, this is an extraordinary asset for the country. It has great impacts on communities, and those things have to come together. That is an incredible, I've thought that for years. I've been going to Colorado Oil and Gas Association for a long time. Convert, but I guess because I am a convert, I realize what an extraordinary balancing act it is, and I'm wondering exactly how you pull that off. It is a perfect in the middleness, which means everybody's going to be pissed off. And actually Tisha Scheller here, the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, is somebody who's really trying to work that, and I know there are plenty of others, but that's where the armchair quarterback thing becomes almost more adrenaline so that I can to watch that, but I'm fascinated by doing that, and I think it's a very good cause. The third point on renewable energies on the public lands, Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service already have an extraordinary challenge and conundrum in the multiple use mandate, and really doing species and water and maintaining petroglyphs, and I mean they have quite a big charge, and to put this in when, of course, some people who would very much like to develop more renewable energy in places distant from their homes or from the places where they love to hike, they're not going to be particularly collaborative on this. So there again, I just think that's a fascinating item, and it worries me that it's going to get it from both sides again, or 5 or 6 or 7 sides, and how you maneuver in that. There are cognitive psychologists who can help us with how people can make decisions when everyone's screeching at them. And I wonder if some of our psychology comrades on campus could have been...
Well, I have a feeling we're about to be screeched at. So.
Oh, well, better. Well, then I'll try to be amateur cognitive psychologist at that point. Dan, where am I? I'm on I did the public lands, and then I'm on my fourth and fifth points. The fourth one is a bigger historical point. Because this is the 75th anniversary of a bunch of our major water institutions, the Colorado Water Conservation Board and a couple other big districts, we're all talking, we were at the Colorado Water Congress yesterday talking about the 75th anniversary, and thus spending a lot of time with water engineers who don't speak that much about history, comparing the 1930s and the present. So that has led me to a line of thought where I don't know how anyone on the planet could think that Franklin Roosevelt had an easy job of it. But it has struck me that Franklin Roosevelt had advantages that President Obama does not have, even though he had 25% unemployment, and it seems ridiculous to say that Roosevelt had an easier job. But in my judgment, what he seems to have been able to, what he had presented to him in his social and cultural context was an assumption that there is a connection between individual benefit and public and national benefit, that there is a thing called the public good and individuals participate in that. That does not seem to be available now. Does that mean that it couldn't be created in a different form? And to me, the word infrastructure is some significant part of the problem because it is the dullest, worst word on the planet. And the notion of trying to give an inspirational speech about infrastructure just makes a orator weep over that. So how to take something so important and find a way of rephrasing that in a way that does enliven the public, that's a big challenge. Although, again, Roosevelt had a lot of that already in place to draw on, which I think literally did make his job easier, and there are other dimensions to Roosevelt's advantage that I'll talk about some other time. And then the fifth point was that I did listen to the speech, and I was impressed by it. And then I listened to to Mitch Daniels' response to it, and I listened to other critics responding, and I thought, they don't seem to have heard the same speech I heard. And they were, Mitch Daniels did say some nice things at the beginning, and then instantly went to the president is trying to divide us, and I thought, now I would have sworn that I just heard quite a few statements about unifying us, and that made me start to think, maybe this is one of those situations where people in that world are speaking in a code that I am not familiar with. And that rather like people who are old acquaintances or friends who know how to drive each other crazy in ways that the rest of us can't see. I went to one dinner party when I was in graduate school at Yale where, well, we won't go into that too much, but the couple seemed to be saying nothing unpleasant to each other, but they both got more agitated as the evening went on, and we all thought, what could that have been about? So is there a code that I am not able to break? Maybe it's some kind of subliminal thing like drink Coke flashed on the but there's something that is happening there in that communication structure that I think the rest of us listen to it and think, now what is it that group that knows how to rile each other up in ways that the rest of us can't even perceive? But for issues as important as what we are speaking of today, if there's something to do just with that code and a forthright statement to all of us about what is happening there from both or all sides on that, that would just seem to be such a blessing, because I went to bed bewildered after the speech. That's it.
Thank you. So we'll open it up in just a minute. I want to react from my own perspective on the hydraulic fracturing piece, which has been raised, and I'm sure, as Nancy knows, there's intense local interest in this, given that much of it occurs in our areas. From my perspective, from the political side, while the technology, as you mentioned, is certainly promising, I, based on input from my constituents, believe that it's not consistent with urban and suburban densely populated areas. And I think a lot of the problems occur when we try to utilize, and the good news, as Dr. Limerick knows, is most of the West is not urban and suburban. It's wide open. And if some of it has to be foregone to account for population density in urban and suburban areas, I think it would be significantly less controversial. And that's been an issue that many of my constituents have raised with me in my office. So with that, we'll be happy to open it up and take some, we'll probably have time for 3 or 4 questions. Yes, and just speak loudly if you don't mind.
Yes. 20% of our power and energy needs right now are nuclear generated, And from time to time, we hear from Washington that this is going to be encouraged or improved or new technology. And then at other times, it completely drops off the screen. And recently, except for throwing out the Yucca Mountain as a storage site, I haven't heard anything. And I wondered if the two of you who are in Washington can just comment about that.
Let me repeat the question briefly. The question was just about nuclear. The questioner said that a significant percentage of our energy comes from nuclear. Has there been any discussion of that? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. What's the current state of that? And I guess how does the administration see nuclear?
So I think the president touched more generally on energy the other night and talked about sort of the all of the above, because we having a diversity of sources to get our energy from as we get to this transition to clean energy is very important. Nuclear obviously has some very positive attributes in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and other things, and some reasons that people are concerned. I think there's a couple of things I would just mention that there's definitely a need for additional R&D. Some of that the Department of Energy is doing on the newer generations and newer types of reactors that are can be smaller, less expensive, and importantly, we need to be very concerned about the ability to proliferate. To take the fuel, and so the kinds of technologies need to be proliferation proof, I guess. That's the right term. The second is that, we had a pretty startling event last year after the earthquake and tsunami in Japan and the impact on the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And so the president asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the nuclear regulators, to actually really take a good hard look at what happened there and what we can learn in terms of our own nuclear power plants. And then I think the third thing, you sort of alluded to it, is the question of how do we deal with nuclear waste. And there are a lot of different approaches in different countries, and the U.S. had been going along the road for using the Yucca Mountain repository. The Secretary of Energy asked a very distinguished panel to give him some recommendations about how we need to think about nuclear waste, and they just came out yesterday. This was a panel that was chaired by General Brent Scowcroft, who was the National Security Advisor under the first George Bush president, and then Lee Hamilton, a former congressman, and they made some very interesting recommendations, and I think that will help us to move the dialogue along about how we deal with the waste from nuclear power plants.
Is there a question over here I saw? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to ask a question about the cross-state air pollution rule, the air toxics rules that you mentioned. The cross-state air pollution rule, of course, is in litigation now. It may be that the air toxics rule will be in litigation in the next few weeks. But assuming those go into effect, the investment community is suggesting that despite the fact that there are conventional technologies that you mentioned available to deal with those issues, that it's likely that these older coal-fired power plants will shut down rather than install the new equipment that they need, because it's actually cheaper to simply build new combined cycle gas plants, particularly if the price of gas where it is. This strikes me as a good thing, and without actually sort of forcing this on the industry, I'm wondering if the administration has given thought to how they might facilitate this transition from coal to natural gas.
Well, but I think as you suggest, and given natural gas prices and that I mean, we hear very similar things, that the market is going to push the replacement for any plants that do shut down, whether it's a result of these rules or for any other reasons, would likely to be replaced by combined cycle natural gas. And the technology in these existing power plants is it's 60 or 70 years old, and that that there are more efficient technologies that are available, primarily natural gas. So, in some sense, the choice is in front of those who have to manage the system about what they do. And the president, I think, we've heard concerns about, what would be the result of plants shutting down. Should we be worried about the reliability of the electric system? And I think the information from the Department of Energy, from the Energy Information Administration, is that there shouldn't be any national reliability concerns, and that there's likely not to be any local ones, but that we need to keep an eye on that. And so at the time that EPA issued the mercury and air toxics rule, the president issued a memorandum just directing all those agencies that have a role in that to work together to make sure that if there are any concerns about reliability, we can deal with them, and there are some ways in the Clean Air Act that you can do that. So I think this is an area where the market will sort out some of these things, and that's probably okay.
Alice?
Thanks, George. Thank you for being here. And somewhat related to that question, I have a fear that right now natural gas is actually competing with renewable energy. And that's something I think the administration has to deal with really aggressively. The production tax credit that companies like Vestas rely on might expire, and if it's not renewed, they're leaving. So the job creation around the new energy economy could be completely undone. And I think a lot of us have a fear about the role that natural gas will play unless the administration really takes part in directing that. So I'd love to see sort of the bigger picture, how you see about building up renewable energy, and to making sure that in the short term, particularly while it's cheap, that it's not undoing what we've tried to work so hard on about building up this renewable energy industry.
Thank you for the question. I think the president addressed some of that in the speech, and obviously there's more behind that. I mean, the first thing he said, and he reiterated his call for a clean energy standard, and that until the time when we we'll get back to, at some point, to energy and climate legislation, that this is a really important step and something Congress should do and can do to do a clean energy standard. And the president laid out some aggressive goals for that. So I think that's the first thing. And we've certainly seen in states like Colorado and California the impact that a renewable portfolio or renewable energy standard can have to help drive some of the decisions in the marketplace. The second thing that the president mentioned is, as you alluded to, was the tax credits, and he called for extension of the manufacturing tax credit, expansion of that, and also extension of the production tax credit. And so we're hopeful that Congress will act on that sometime this year.
I wouldn't be too hopeful with the current composition of Congress, but
it's but there's some things, of course, that we can do on our own, and there are other things that clearly we need the Congress's support for. So that's the second thing, and I think I think that we'll continue to look for the ways that we can, using our administrative authority, reiterate the support, I think, that you heard from the president, understanding that in one sense, cheap natural gas, so keep leaving aside where it comes from and the questions I think that have to be answered about the technique itself. Cheap natural gas is generally very good for the United States, for our economy, and we know that there are concerns about what it's crowding out, but I think that we do have to continue with this. We've got to do all of these things because the president also talked about, we're not going to cede leadership in this area to other countries, and we shouldn't use, bad news out of, a single company as a reason to not continue to support the market development of these clean energy technologies.
So our time is running out. What I thought we would do is just have 3 more questions, just 1, 2, 3, and then we'll give the entire panel the chance to address any of those that they choose to and make any concluding remarks. So 1, Noah, 2, and then 3. So we have 3, and then we'll listen to those, and then we'll close out. Who is the first? Yes, go ahead.
I agree with the good news about the new fuel economy standards. Thank you all. I want to hear hear you say just something about conservation in buildings.
Yep.
I know the president mentioned commercial buildings. Can you give us a national view on the gains to be had from conservation in heating and cooling kinds of things, and what's being done about that?
Very good. Second? Yeah.
On the opening up of lands, sacrificing some of the lands for to hold off on urban development of natural gas that you mentioned. There are some lands that I think ought to be assessed and preserved as they are. Well, for example, in Jackson County is one example. And once natural gas gets a foothold in there, you essentially created a change in character of the land from what I would call a rural ranching environment to an industrialized environment. And once that has changed, it's irreversible. And I think there ought to be some assessment. That's one example that I think ought to be preserved.
Thank you. And final question?
Thank you. Noah Finkelstein from the Department of Physics. I want to, well, first thank the 4 great public servants that are here and suggest that our students consider such tremendous trajectories there. And thank you for honoring being at a university to have this discussion. Not only are we the place where we're doing research and development, and I'm a big fan of Ray C. and crew and the R&D that's going behind the clean tech that we're talking about here, but I also wanted to ask at 2 different levels the role that the university plays in its other half, or its coupled half, which is as an educational institution. What roles do we have, or what role can the government play to couple this initiative in clean energy, renewable energy, and the energy future with education in STEM and the tremendous challenges? And then on the other half, what role do we have as faculty, students, staff at the university to participate and engage our students in these important issues?
It's a great question. Why don't we start at the end and kind of give Dr. Limerick a chance?
I have 2 just very quick things that you keep wondering, hanging out in circles where natural gas development is discussed. Lots of people say, can we designate special places? Is there a conversation we can have about rural places that are special? Because I understand the industry feels that anytime they think they have a resource, that place becomes special. And so I understand their puzzlement over that. But that would just be such a interesting process to see if that could actually happen. And I would, Senator American West would certainly be very happy if we could preside over such a discussion, because it seems that that's what we do. We have city parks where we don't ride our ATVs. And so it's possible to have those kinds of designations, and that seems really worth thinking about with gas production. And then the university as educational institutions. I am having a wonderful time, really, with 230 freshmen, mostly. I'm not sure they're having a wonderful time every moment, but I'm having a wonderful time. And I think what came over me this semester, being out in the world where people are working with these issues, I thought, oh, dear me, Forest Service, whatever. These people are the staff are very taken with what they have always done and struggling about what they could change and what they have always done. Looking at the freshmen in my class, I just have thought, well, here are several hundred people who cannot conduct themselves trying to do what they have always done because they haven't done anything, right? I mean, they can't say, oh, this is how we always handle this policy question, because they've never handled a policy question in their lives. So there's a great freshness there, and they're called freshmen for some reason, aren't they? So I want us to educate them, but I want us to keep in mind that there's something very excellent about the fact that they do not know the ruts in which we travel. And I think in some ways inadvertently, I and others have tried to educate them into the ruts and how to run around those ruts. And I'm just more struck by how excellent it is that they don't have, well, they don't have our good habits, that's for sure, but they also don't have, well, that's not true. Some of them have very good habits, but others of them, several young people had not done the reading in class yesterday, I'll just say that. So, but they also have some very, there's a bunch of our bad habits that they don't have yet, and it would be nice if we could keep that in play.
So I'll also take Noah's question about the role of the university and jump off Jared's point about not holding your breath that the current Congress will act on anything. The good news is this: there will come a time when there will be a Congress that will look ahead about what our energy future needs to look like and what public policy needs to be. And until that time, universities will play a phenomenally important role as centers for education, discourse, and convening on a variety of dimensions that are going to have to come together. A challenge is that infrastructure and energy are often seen as boring, like Patty said.
Yeah,
That's a huge problem.
that's a huge one.
We need to get people excited about these areas and passionate about them. What's good that's happened, and I think Nancy represents as well as anybody, is people who've always cared about the environment now realize the environment and energy are inextricably linked. That is a key step in this direction. Thoughtful policymaking of the kind that Patty praised, where you get people together and think, listen, we want to have natural gas development. Where and how is the question, to do so responsibly and sustainably. Jared raised some good concerns. Other people have raised concerns. These can be worked through, and thankfully, the states are a great laboratory of experimentation. They are open for business. They can't wait till next year, 2 years to 3 years. They're struggling with these issues now. Also, let me put another plug out for the electric grid. It has to innovate. We have to take what has been a very static system and find ways to make it more adaptable for technological development of all kinds. For those interested in that, March 13th, right here, we'll have a discussion. You're all invited. So please come to that. And finally, energy financing, both on the R&D and then on the technological development and commercialization, the entrepreneurial success stories that Jared represents. That's what's made this country fabulous, and that's what we're going to continue to see in energy, where there's all sorts of interesting opportunities, and supporting students thinking about being part of these entrepreneurial success stories is another way we as a university can be helpful.
Thanks. On the question about conservation, I think it's absolutely probably the best thing we can do right now. And the cleanest and cheapest unit of energy is the one that we don't use. And the president talked about that. I mean, 40% of our energy is used in buildings. So, there's a lot that we can do both at the residential level. There's 130 million homes in the U.S., probably 129.9 million of them, people have no idea how they use energy in their homes. And so there's a lot we can do there. We were fortunate in the Recovery Act to be able to put a lot of money into residential energy upgrades, and what we've been working on is trying to see how we at the federal level can support trying to keep that industry going long past the time when federal money will, in the amounts that we were able to do in the Recovery Act, will dry up. So we've been working on that, and a lot of that's about information and training and financing, and how do we help consumers access the kind of off-the-shelf technology that's out there to make their homes more energy efficient. And the president last February launched a Better Buildings initiative, really aimed at the commercial building sector, with some on the policy side, looking at the tax code and some things in the tax code that can help provide additional incentives for businesses and people who own commercial real estate to upgrade their buildings. But he also challenged the private sector and the public sector to get to a goal of making our commercial buildings 20% more energy efficient by 2020. And we've got more than 1 billion square feet of commercial real estate signed up in this challenge to do that. And the federal government, putting its money where its mouth is, committed to $2 billion worth of energy service contracts for our own buildings to reduce our energy use. But it is a very, very important area. And the question about lands for natural gas, I think there's a couple of things. One, obviously, we have ways that our public lands are managed, and that we need to make sure that all the whole planning and review and the environmental reviews that go along with that are thorough. The president talked the other night about the Department of Interior will soon issue a proposal for the disclosure of fracking chemicals for fracking that's on public lands. That's something that the federal government has sort of exclusive jurisdiction over. But there's also, I think, a role certainly for the kind of dialogue at the community level about what people see for the lands around them, for the places that they care about. So we've been working, a number of us, including Ken Salazar and others, on something we've called America's Great Outdoors, and really recognizing that there's a different model for conservation in the 21st century, that it comes from the communities, and that the federal government, as much as we manage the Rocky Mountain National Park and Yosemite and Yellowstone, we also have to be a better partner with communities as they try to conserve the places that they care about. So that's something we'll continue to work on. And on the question of educational institutions, I think there's, the university folks here on the panel mentioned there's lots of ways universities and students can be involved. But I think one of the things I've seen over the last 15 years, both at the university level and in my work in the public sector, is really a lot of people thinking about these issues not as, the environment is EPA's problem, that the environment is everybody's issue. And so whether you're a business student or an engineering student or a historian or whatever you're interested in, there are ways. And I think this generation is much more innovative and entrepreneurial about thinking about how we all, in the many different ways, we all interact with our environment. So I think to the extent that universities can help to nurture that sort of cross-discipline approach, that integrated approach, that everybody can play a role in the new clean energy economy, I think that will be a very important contribution universities can make.
Thank you. Our time is coming to a close, and I think the only thing I want to add is with regard to the green buildings. Chair Sutley's other activity in our town will actually be to visit Casey Middle School, a LEED certified with the recent bond initiative several years ago. I see a few people in the room that were active in that bond initiative. I co-chaired at the time in a prior life, and we're very excited to highlight government at all levels. When we talk about government, it's not just federal, school districts, cities, the military, yes, but school districts in particular are an extremely large public enterprise, and that's a discussion in every community around their capital. Certainly in our community, around the bond committee, there was a very vibrant discussion of how can we make sure that we include green elements in this to reflect the values of our community, as well as educational values that we can impart to the next generation. So let's give a big round of applause to our panelists here today.